The Subcommittee on Space will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing titled A Review of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Budget for Fiscal Year 2015. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth and testimony disclosure for today's witness. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Mr. Administrator, I will begin my statement this morning with a sincere thank you for your leadership and the hard work of all the men and women at NASA. While I do not always agree with the administration's decisions, I appreciate the good people at NASA and their service to the country. The President's budget request this year for NASA is $17.4 billion, a decrease of $186 million relative to the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was signed by the President only 2 months ago. I am most concerned by the administration's insistence on reordering the funding priorities of the agency. The Consolidated Appropriations Act provided clear priorities to the administration. In fact, Administrator Bolden heaped praise on the appropriation for NASA the day it passed. And yet we see again that the President has chosen to realign those priorities he agreed to in both the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 and the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Again this year, the administration is proposing funding for the Asteroid Redirect Mission, or ARM. There is still no budget profile, program office, or schedule for this mission. So we are in the same position we were a year ago when it was first announced. The Consolidated Appropriations Act directed NASA to produce more information on this mission before further investments will be considered. I hope to hear from the Administrator today that these plans are under development and that the agency is also taking ongoing concerns from many in the scientific community and its own advisory groups into consideration. At the same time, the administration has requested these additional funds for the ARM. Cuts have been made to top agency and congressional priorities. For the 4th year in a row, the administration has requested a reduction to the Orion crew capsule and the Space Launch System. This year's budget requests cut these programs by $330 million. As Administrator Bolden stated the day the appropriations bill passed, the bill keeps NASA's deep space exploration program on track. Surely if $1.6 billion would only keep the SLS and Orion on track, a $219 million cut could derail those efforts. This is simply unacceptable. These critical assets are the essential components of our future deep space human exploration efforts. The administration cannot in the same breath claim to support space exploration while continuing to divert agency budgets in a manner that undermines that mission. The agency must be mission-focused and budget vigilant, and that is why I will continue to work for appropriate funding levels for these systems. Just as in years past, the administration is requesting large increases in the commercial crew program without any data to back up the request. One of my top priorities as chairman of this subcommittee, especially in times of international uncertainty, is ensuring we restore the capability to launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil as soon as possible. Our commercial partners are the key to making that possible, as they relieve us from relying on the Russians for access to the International Space Station. But in times of budget constraint, we must be sure we are doing the best we can with what we have. This proposal should be accompanied by a strategic acquisition plan and other planning documents in order to justify the administration's budget request increase of $152 million. Additionally, this year's budget request also includes the cancellation of the SOFIA program. American taxpayers invested $1.2 billion on this one-of-a-kind asset, and the administration is proposing cancellation just as it gets off the ground. Administrator Bolden, he said you might be more helpful in answering questions we have about the proposed cancellation of SOFIA. I would hate to see us cancel yet another international partnership in the same manner as we did with the ExoMars project. I am moved to ask, how can the international community rely on this administration to collaborate on anything without fear of cancellation? There's no doubt that our nation's space program is facing many challenges. That is all the more reason the administration must deliver budgets and goals that support a serious commitment to human exploration and stop using the Science Mission Directorate as a partisan football. The scientists and engineers who work every day to maintain U.S. leadership in space are counting on you. The American public is counting on the President, and they are counting on each of us here in this room to have an honest conversation about where we are at this time in our nation's space program and to make tough choices. It means setting politics aside and investing strategically in our future. I am ready to work together to ensure the priorities from previous legislation that the President signed will be honored. The future of our space program depends on it. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to General Bolden for being here today with us. I appreciate holding a hearing to review the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's budget for fiscal year 2015, and I want to welcome, of course, Administrator Bolden. Also congratulate NASA and all of its contractor, private sector workforce on a number of successful launches and milestones that they've achieved over this past year. I am and always have been, will be, a passionate person about NASA and our space program and the people who work in it. Our program, our space program, has been a symbol of our greatness as a nation, a means for peaceful collaboration with other nations, a bedrock of our capacity for innovation, and a powerful source of inspiration for student and professional engagement in science and technology. NASA will continue to be these things and more, but only if we provide it with the stability and resources needed to meet its multi-mission responsibilities in aeronautics, space science, earth science, human spaceflight, and human exploration. That's why I'm pleased that the $18.3 billion proposed for NASA for fiscal year 2015, which incorporates the funding being requested as part of the Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative, is close to the level specified for fiscal year 2015 in the NASA Authorization Act, the bill that I and full committee Ranking Member Johnson introduced last July. I support the President's growth initiative to make further investments in research and development that will help grow the nation's economy and create jobs. That said, I recognize that there will be much discussion about this initiative, so we need to understand the impacts to NASA's programs if the agency is only provided the base level request of $17.46 billion. For example, I have questions about the reduced funding requested for the Space Launch System and Orion crew vehicle, and the potential impact it will have on the program's abilities to achieve critical test flights in 2017 and 2021. I also want to understand the implications of the proposed shutdown of the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, SOFIA, good thing we call it SOFIA, a project that was undertaken in partnership with Germany. And I want to hear about whether there are options that should be explored and that were explored that might preserve our investment in this facility. I also want to learn more about the proposal to fund studies on potential wide-field infrared survey telescope WFIRST mission and the science that such a mission might enable. I look forward to hearing from Administrator Bolden about increases being requested for the commercial crew program. We need to know what we will be getting for that money and how NASA will ensure that both astronaut safety and the interest of the taxpayer will be protected. In addition, I hope to learn today whether the base level request for the International Space Station, and particularly that for research on the ISS, will be sufficient to ensure that a robust research pipeline is in place to support the proposed extension of ISS operations and utilization through 2024. And I have questions about the proposed changes to NASA's education programs. We've raised those questions here in this committee before. Those programs to date have played a critical role in inspiring so many of our nation's youth to seek science and technical degrees and careers. Mr. Chairman, I also want to take this opportunity to clarify for the record that while I paid the NASA administrator a compliment for his passionate and lucid explanation of the asteroid redirect mission to a group of students recently, that's how I spend my time watching television, I continue to have questions about this potential mission and how it would contribute relative to other potential missions to enable the goal of sending humans to the surface of Mars. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'm hopeful that today's discussion will help inform our continuing work on reauthorizing NASA. I want to commend you and your staff, Mr. Chairman, for working with our team, because I think that we can get from here together on the same page as Republicans and Democrats in support of our space mission. I know that we both share the goal of achieving a strong bipartisan NASA authorization bill to provide the stability and resources NASA needs if it is to accomplish the inspiring missions we have asked it to carry out. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate Administrator Bolden appearing before us again today to present the President's budget request for NASA. While we may disagree on a few topics, I think we share the same desire to ensure that NASA remains the world's preeminent space agency so that our nation continues to lead the world in space exploration and discovery. And that is why I am concerned with the President's Fiscal Year 2015 budget request. Just 3 months ago, Congress and the President reached an agreement on NASA's budget. Now, just a few weeks later, the President recommends a $185 million cut to NASA. It also again seeks to fund an asteroid redirect or retrieval mission, despite what one article this week described as, quote, scant support in Congress and similarly muted interest in the science community, end quote. The administration continues to push this mission on NASA without any connection to a larger exploration roadmap and absent support from the scientific community or NASA's own advisory bodies. It is a mission without a realistic budget, without a destination, and without a certain launch date. The committee has heard a number of concerns about the mission as well as many promising alternatives. For instance, the committee recently held a hearing on the potential for a flyby mission to Venus and Mars in 2021. While the mission is not without challenges, it is intriguing and would catch the public's imagination. Unfortunately, the budget underfunds the Space Launch System and Orion programs, as well as the Planetary Science Division. The White House's approach has been to raid NASA's budget to fund the administration's environmental agenda. There are 13 other agencies that are involved in climate change research, yet only one conducts space exploration. In the last 7 years, the Earth Science Division funding has increased over 63%. NASA needs to remember its priorities, and the priority is space exploration. I'm glad to see that NASA is working to complete the James Webb Space Telescope and to initiate the production of the Wide Field Infrared Space Telescope as well. And NASA finally has included a budget line for a Europa mission, even if it is just for 1 year and too little. Over the last 2 years, Congress has funded a Europa mission at $75 million and $80 million. So the 1 year funding of $15 million is as disappointing as the potential life that may exist under the ice of Jupiter's moon is fascinating. Our leadership in space has slipped. The administration, I hope, will step back, look at the agency as a whole, and work to put it on the long-term path to achieve worthy and inspirational goals on behalf of our nation. Space exploration inspires American students and excites scientists. If we want to continue to be a world leader and take giant leaps for mankind, NASA must ensure its budget reflects the importance of space exploration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to this morning's hearing, Administrator Bolden. I look forward to your testimony today. You have a very challenging job with a great many responsibilities, and I know that all of us appreciate the service that you render to our nation. As the Chairman has indicated, we are here today to review NASA's Fiscal Year 2015 budget request. At the outset, I want to say that I'm heartened that the President has been willing to commit more than $18.3 billion to NASA for fiscal year 2015, a 4% increase over the fiscal year 2014 appropriations. Achieving that level, however, will require Congress to work with the President to achieve targeted spending cuts and increase revenue to provide necessary offsets and stay within the budget agreement. I hope that my friends across the aisle will agree with me that NASA and its programs are worth a little effort on Congress's part to identify the needed funds. The ball is now in our court. That said, I want to use the remaining of my time to raise a few issues that I hope will be discussed today. First, I'm troubled by the cuts being proposed to NASA's education activities. These cuts do not appear to be just the result of achieving increased efficiencies through interagency collaborations. They are cuts, pure and simple, which I consider to be the wrong message to be sending as we try to engage the next generation in STEM pursuits. Second, I have to confess that I'm a bit weary of the annual cycle of the administration proposing reductions in the funding for the Space Launch System and the Orion exploration vehicles. Both of those vehicles are under development and approaching initial testing milestones. This is the point in a healthy vehicle development program that funding should be increasing, not decreasing. I expect that this is an area that Congress will once again have to address. And third, I'm a bit puzzled by the cuts proposed by NASA's science programs. Those programs provide not only exceptional science, but also important outreach opportunities and the ability to engage our international partners in meaningful collaborations. We are going to need to look closely at what is being proposed in this budget. Finally, I want to know more about the proposed increases in NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Those increases are quite significant, especially in the context of NASA's constrained budgetary environment. While I certainly want to reduce our dependence on Russia for crew transportation and from the International Space Station, I am not prepared to provide a blank check to do so. As you know, Representative Edwards and I expressed deep concern last fall over NASA's intention to prioritize prices over safety in its evaluation of vendor proposals leading to upcoming contract awards for the development and certification of commercial crew systems. Unfortunately, NASA chose not to make any changes in its final solicitation before it went out. The agency's action is directly counter to the recommendations of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. And despite Administrator Bolden's undisputed personal commitment to safety, I think that is a very worrisome step for the agency to take. Moreover, NASA is waiving the requirement for certified cost or pricing data as part of the same contract. Data that has traditionally been required to protect both the agency and the taxpayer. Administrator Bolden, NASA still has significant time to correct both of these deficiencies before bidders submit their final updates to their proposals later this spring. I urge you to do so, as I would find it difficult to support the funding you're requesting for commercial crew in the absence of such safeguards. Well, we have a lot to talk about today, and I again want to welcome you to today's hearing, Administrator Bolden, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witness. The Honorable Charles F. Bolden, Jr. is the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. His 34-year career with the Marine Corps included 14 years as a member of NASA's astronaut office. After joining the office in 1980, he traveled to orbit 4 times aboard the Space Shuttle between 1986 and 1994, commanding 2 of those missions. Prior to General Bolden's nomination as NASA Administrator, he was employed as the Chief Executive Officer of Jack and Panther, LLC, a small business enterprise providing leadership, military, and aerospace consulting and motivational speaking. As our witness should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize General Bolden for his testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the subcommittee, thank you all for this opportunity to discuss NASA's FY 2015 budget request. A more detailed written summary of the request has already been made available to the subcommittee, so my verbal testimony will just touch on the highlights. The $17.5 billion budget request affirms the bipartisan strategic exploration plan agreed to with Congress in 2010, and it ensures that the United States will remain the world's leader in space exploration and scientific discovery for years to come. It's an investment right here on Earth for the benefit of the American people and the entire global economy. I have a chart I'd like to put up, Mr. Chairman, if I may, for the rest of my statement. And I will refer to this chart off and on as we go. This budget keeps NASA on the steady path we have been following, a stepping stone approach to meet the President's challenge of sending humans to Mars in the 2030s. And as you always see on a chart, it goes from left to right, where we are today to where we want to be in the 2030s. The International Space Station remains our springboard to the exploration of deep space and Mars. We guarantee we'll have this unique orbiting outpost for at least another decade, with our commitment to extend it until at least 2024. This means an expanded market for private space companies, more groundbreaking research and science discovery in microgravity, and opportunities to live, work, and learn in space over longer periods of time. Astronauts aboard the ISS are helping us learn how to safely execute extended missions deeper into space. Later this year, we will see Exploration Flight Test, or EFT-1, of Orion. NASA is pressing forward with development of the Space Launch System and Orion, preparing for an uncrewed mission of the two together in fiscal year 2018. The budget also supports the administration's commitment that NASA be a catalyst for the growth of a vibrant American commercial space industry. Already, two companies, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences, are making regular cargo deliveries to the space station. Later this year, we'll move beyond commercial cargo and award contracts to American companies to send astronauts to the station from American soil and end our sole reliance on Russia. If Congress fully funds our fiscal year 2015 request, I believe we can do this by the end of 2017. Unfortunately, due to the reduced funding the past few years for the President's Launch from America plan, NASA may need to extend our current contract with the Russians and purchase more seats on the Soyuz spacecraft. Instead of investing $450 million into the U.S. economy to support American jobs, we could be spending that money in Russia. Budgets are about choices. The choice here is between fully funding the request to bring space launches back to American soil or continuing to send money, millions, to the Russians. It's that simple. The Obama administration chooses to invest in America, and we are hopeful that Congress will do the same. In addition to continuing ISS research, strengthening partnerships with commercial and international partners, and building the next generation heavy lift rocket and crew capsule to take our astronauts farther into space than ever before, our stepping stone approach includes a plan to robotically capture a small near-Earth asteroid and redirect it safely to a stable orbit in the Earth-Moon system where astronauts can visit and explore it. Our asteroid redirect mission will help us develop technologies, including solar electric propulsion, needed for future deep space missions to Mars. Under our asteroid initiative, we enhance detection and characterization of near-Earth objects and improve understanding of asteroid threats to the planet. NASA's fiscal year 2015 budget request continues support for science missions, heading toward destinations such as Jupiter and Pluto. It enables NASA to continue making critical observations of Earth and developing applications to directly benefit our nation and the world. It maintains steady progress on the James Webb Space Telescope toward its 2018 launch. Our aeronautics program will continue to focus on substantially reducing fuel consumption, emissions, and noise to help make the next generation air transportation system, or NextGen, a reality. Finally, all of NASA's investments help drive technology and innovation, spur economic activity, and create jobs. That's why the President's Opportunity, Growth, and Security Initiative, with congressional approval, will provide NASA nearly $900 million in additional funding in FY15 to focus on specific areas where we can advance our priorities. The fiscal year 2015 budget advances NASA's strategic plan for the future. We'll continue to build U.S. preeminence in science and technology, improve life on Earth, and protect our home planet while creating good jobs and strengthening the American economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
I thank General Bolden for his testimony. Reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. During our budget hearing last year, I asked you about the administration's $60 million reduction to the SLS program in its fiscal 14 budget request. At the time, you believed that discrepancy was more about how the money was classified than an actual reduction. This year, the administration has the SLS vehicle development line very clearly broken out and shows a $219 million reduction to vehicle development. At the time the omnibus passed, you praised the appropriation for keeping NASA's deep space exploration program on track. If the $1.6 billion for SLS will simply keep it on track, how will a $219 million cut affect it, and what activities will you plan to stop in fiscal year 15 that are funded in fiscal year 14?
Mr. Chairman, if I can get the chart back up one more time, I think that'll help me explain my logic and why I think the budget as we requested suffices for keeping us on track to Mars. There are three relevant areas here. We're Earth reliant right now, and we want to get away from that. We need a proving ground before we can go to Mars. There's so much we don't know. We've got to have a place, and preferably somewhere within a day or two from Earth, and that happens to be the Earth-Moon system. So that's why we selected the asteroid redirect mission as our particular stepping stone to go to Mars. In low Earth orbit, we have the International Space Station, which is viable and functioning. So we feel that we've got to do first things first, and first thing for us is making sure that we have a reliable Earth-reliant system. If I don't get commercial crew, that Earth-reliant area becomes weakened. I do not want to be reliant on the Russians to get my crews to the International Space Station. So I don't need a space launch system and Orion if I can't get my crews to low Earth orbit. If we continue to depend on the Russians, then everything else is in jeopardy. So commercial crew is the critical need for this nation right now.
Okay, I mean, I might have a question on commercial crew as well. So basically, you're saying you're reducing the SLS Orion budget in this to fund commercial crew.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not really saying that I'm reducing the SLS Orion budget.
It's a $219 million cut. So what are we going to be putting
in the time that I have been the NASA administrator, we have invested $12.5 billion into space exploration, into SLS, Orion, and the ground systems. $12.5 billion. Over an equivalent time, if we had the shuttle, we would have spent $12 billion. So we've invested more in SLS and Orion than we would have spent on the shuttle if it were still around. The President has requested $109 billion since I became the NASA administrator. 52%, almost 50% of that, $52 billion, has been requested for human exploration. So I think we're quibbling about hundreds of millions of dollars in a multi-billion-dollar budget, and since I'm the CEO of the company trying to get us on this path to Mars, I think that all we need to do is continue on the road we are. I'd invite the members to go to Michoud. We are building hardware. I'd invite the members to go to the Kennedy Space Center. They will see Orion, ready to fly next fall. So we are producing. We're not cutting back on anything. We have hardware in production right now.
I appreciate that answer. It doesn't quite, satisfy my question,
yes,
but I'll follow up with you at a later time to get more information. For the past 2 years, you have graciously come before Congress and testified that without receiving full funding for commercial crew, NASA would not be able to deliver certified crew transfer service to the ISS by 2017. However, despite receiving less than the request both years, NASA continues to claim that these services will be available by 2017. It would seem that one of three things happened with this program. Either NASA consistently requested more money than it needed for the program, or NASA won't be able to meet the 2017 launch schedule, or there's more flexibility in the acquisition strategy than NASA is leading on. How can you say that if you don't get full funding for commercial crew this year that the schedule will slip when this is the exact same thing you said in previous years, and yet just this week NASA claimed to be on schedule for 2017?
Mr. Chairman, if the committee would indulge me, I'd ask everybody to think back to my first hearings when I became the NASA administrator. When we started talking about commercial crew at that time, we were requesting $1 billion. We requested $1 billion over the next 6 years for a total of $6 billion for commercial crew. That was based on my estimate and that of the Augustine Committee that said one provider would cost about $2.5 billion. We multiplied it by 2, and I added $1 billion. So that's how I got to $6 billion. We got zero the first year. The second year we got $525 million. At the time, we were targeting 2015 for the availability of commercial crew. We would now find ourselves months away from launching Americans from American soil, and I wouldn't have to worry about paying the Russians another $450 million. Over time, when I kept coming back to the committee, I said, if we don't get full funding, we're going to slip. I came back finally and said, we have slipped. We now will not have commercial crew available until 2017, and we may not have the competition that I need. The committee implored us to down select to 1. We said, please don't make us do that. We need competition. So I just want to remind everybody of the history of commercial crew and how we got here today. We are now faced with a 2017 availability from 2015. So I have been consistent. I have said we will slip if we don't get the funding. We have slipped 2 years. I am saying the same thing again today. If we don't get what the President requested, I can't guarantee 2017, I can't guarantee competition, and we will continue to pay the Russians. I don't like that.
So even though in previous years you said the same thing, but you still contend that we're going to be on schedule for 2017?
Mr. Chairman, I need for everybody to understand what I just said. I said 2015, the first time I testified before this committee. I said we can do that if we fund the President's budget. I came back at a subsequent point and said, okay, we're not going to make 2015. We can make 2017. Given the level of funding we have, we are on track to still get to 2017 if we're given the amount of money that the President requested in the 2015 budget.
Well, General, I think this committee and Congress agrees with you. We don't want to be solely reliant on the Russians for human access to space. I mean, we want to launch American astronauts from American soil on American rockets.
Mr. Chairman, as I said before, budgets are about choices. This committee, this Congress chose to rely on the Russians because they chose not to accept the President's recommendation and request for full funding for commercial crew. You can't have it both ways.
Well, we're getting away from that. So, I mean,
we're not away from it yet because I don't have a 2015 budget.
We're not wanting to continue to rely on the Russians, but we, again, we have some serious budget constraints, not just dealing with NASA's budget, but with all of our discretionary spending. We're looking at some serious issues. And we know the world's not becoming a safer place. It's becoming much more dangerous. And, we have to make sure that we have a presence in space. If not, those friends that aren't so friendly to us will have a presence. And you as a general in the Marine Corps know that whoever has the high ground pretty much dominates the battle space. So with that, my time has expired. I will turn to the ranking member for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll take advantage of that extra 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Thanks. That's all right. I want to continue this line of questioning, though, because I look at, in your prepared statement, Mr. Administrator, you indicate that we can stay on track to launch astronauts to the ISS from American soil by the end of 2017 if Congress fully funds your 2015 budget request. That budget request is $848.3 million. And last year you received 696.
Yes.
So the choice for Congress is that in order for you to commit to making that 2017 date, we have to commit to the 848.3. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am.
That's correct.
And in addition to that, I want to know then what your confidence level is if we are at 848.3.
My confidence level of making 2017, if we're 848.3, is good. It is high for making 2017. My confidence level for making 2017 with robust competition is not as high. That's the reason that we put $150 million into the Opportunity Fund, because that would get us to $1 billion.
I want to get to what informs your confidence, because
Bill Gersten,
there hasn't. Well, I want to know. Well, we had requested, the committee requested an independent cost estimate that wasn't done, and so tell me what the basis is for your 2017 confidence level.
My basis for every statement I make before this committee is my leadership team, and Bill Gerstenmaier heads up the human exploration and mission operations. Until I get half as smart as they are, that's going to be my. And we're also talking to industry. People, we are dependent on American industry contributing the major portion of what is going into the commercial crew program. We are able to stay on track so far because I don't know how much SpaceX, Boeing, Sierra Nevada has put of their own personal funds into commercial crew. I know they put more than we have. So the difference to keep us on track has been because the companies are expecting that we will fully fund it at one of these days, and they continue to up their investment would be my guess.
So let me just ask, so with the 2014 enacted levels of funding for SLS Orion, and what you requested, resulting then, you're saying, in the slip to 2017.
No, the 2017 slip came long before 2014.
That.
Yeah.
So what, if Congress doesn't fund fully at 848.3, what development activities will have to be delayed in order to accommodate?
Milestone achievements on the part of the commercial crew providers, compliance with human rating standards and other requirements. They will, because they'll be under contract when we award the contract, we'll have to stretch that contract out. That's what always happens. You have less money. We have two things we can work with. We can work with cost and schedule. If I don't have enough money, the schedule stretches out. It always does. In commercial crew under the Space Act agreement, I didn't have to worry as much about the cost because that was a partnership. And so the companies were also putting in money as necessary to make sure that they stayed on track with their milestones.
So let me just ask again, and maybe you have it, but can you provide to us the independent cost assessment that was done that informs your belief and your confidence in the 2017 date
yes,
for commercial crew?
I am told that that will be available shortly, and so we will get that to the subcommittee.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're counting on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Administrator. And then I want to ask you on commercial crew. I'm concerned about the possibility of a premature selection of commercial crew transportation service provider and how that translates into safety for our astronauts. So the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, the ASAP, recommended in its annual report for 2013 that competition be maintained until safety confidence is achieved. So how are you dealing with these safety considerations? And if we're going to keep the process open for competition, how do you inject safety in there?
We inject safety by putting the competition in and writing contracts that allow us to get into the facilities and levy additional regulations if necessary, or requirements. We are confident right now. We just went through a contract process, or we're in the middle of a contract process right now. It's called Commercial Crew Capabilities Assessment, and it is the contract that over the last year has allowed us to work with the companies. We asked them, demonstrate to us how you're going to meet our safety standards. Demonstrate to us how you're going to document meeting those safety standards. Show us how you're going to handle hazard reports. We're already doing that with them, and we have worked with them for years to reach agreements on what those standards would be. They can meet or exceed NASA standards, and in many cases, that's exactly what they're going to do. So they will cite their own standard.
So my time has more than expired, but let me just read to you from the ASAP annual report. Quote, if NASA down selects to one provider before the selectee has demonstrated that its design can meet the required level of safety, there is the ultimate potential that the provider may not be able to meet the requirements for a number of reasons, including cost. In such a situation, NASA will have little alternative, because it's already down selected, those are my words, but to either move the safety goalpost or to incur an overrun and or a schedule slip. If competition is maintained, NASA may have alternatives other than accepting a less safe design, unnecessary higher cost, or a late delivery. I only shared that with the committee and you because it's very clear that if we move toward one, depending on what our budget numbers are, then the likelihood that we are not paying the kind of attention in commercial crew to safety actually goes up, not down.
No, ma'am. The likelihood that we are going to pay less attention to safety is zero. Safety is something that I do, that Bill Gerstenmaier does, that the commercial crew program manager does, and that is our attention to safety is independent of cost. We may become even more vigilant, which means the schedule is really going to stretch out because we're going to require additional tests. That's what happens when you don't have competition. The vendor begins to think that, okay, you're relying on me, you've got to have it at this date, and you have to take what we want. That's not the case. We are not going to do that.
I apologize. I'm now at exactly 2 minutes.
I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Bolden, I think we're all regretful that we are relying upon the Russians to take American astronauts to the International Space Station. Given the turmoil in the Ukraine, given our current relationship with Russia, which is obviously not good, are you aware of any threat that Russia might refuse to take American astronauts to the International Space Station for any reason?
I am not aware of any threat, and I am comfortable because, you know, we talk to the Russians every day. We talk to Roscosmos.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in Russia. Our partner is not Russia. Our partner is Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and we're confident that they are just as interested and just as intent on maintaining that partnership as we are.
Hopefully the problems on Earth are not going to be.
This is not the first time that we've
orbit.
had this type of problem. When the Russians went into Georgia, the partnership remained robust, and that's what we're trying to do right now.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to my next question, and this is about ARM. Last May, NASA Advisory Council Chairman Dr. Steve Squires testified, quote, "I see no obvious connection between the asteroid retrieval mission and any of the technologies or capabilities that are required for Martian exploration," end quote. I understand that NASA is undertaking a study on the possibility of a Mars flyby in 2021. Is that the case?
That is not the case as far as I know. We have been working with Inspiration Mars, which is I think what you're talking about. We agreed that we would allow them to take NASA technology. They can use NASA facilities. We will partner with them.
Perhaps I misunderstood you, because I thought you specifically told me in response to a letter that I sent you that you would review that.
Oh, I thought you asked if we were doing a study. We're not doing a study.
Well, we are
reviewing.
Okay. Just like you reviewed the 2018, are you reviewing the 2021?
We are reviewing any efforts that NASA might make in supporting Inspiration Mars.
You're not making any official evaluation of it?
We continue to make evaluation of it as they come back. This started out as a partnership where they needed nothing from NASA except do not talk bad about my mission.
So then maybe I misunderstood your letter to me. I thought you were undertaking a review, but you're not.
We are not undertaking a formal review where we go out and hire an independent firm, if that's what you mean.
That's not what I was asking. I was asking about an internal review.
We're constantly reviewing whether or not Inspiration Mars and the Mars flyby is a suitable alternative for us in getting to Mars, putting humans on Mars.
I just quoted the chairman of the NASA Advisory Council as saying that there was no obvious connection between.
I think if you talk to Steve Squires today, because of where we are, the maturity of the.
I don't doubt you could put political pressure on him, but
I don't put any pressure. No, that is why he's the chairman of the.
When he testified before this committee, he was very clear. What I just said was a direct quote.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, I put no pressure. I can't put pressure on Steve Squires. He chairs.
Well, then, as far as I'm concerned, his testimony before the committee stands, and the quote that I just gave you is still valid, unless you've got other information.
I have other information, which is talking to Steve Squires weekly. And Steve Squires counsel me, don't make this seem like you're going to save the planet. Show us, the NASA Advisory Committee, how this is relevant to getting people to Mars. We have subsequently done that. And if you can put the chart back up again, I'm not going to dwell on the chart.
Yeah.
But
the last I heard, he said there's no connection, so I'm going to take him at his word until I hear from him. Let me go to a different subject, and this is in regard to the James Webb Telescope and the TESS program as well. A happier subject. We expect James Webb to launch in 2018. I think TESS maybe 2017. What information might we glean from those two telescopes that will help us in our understanding of astrobiology?
James Webb actually will enable us to look into the atmosphere of some of, if not all, of the exoplanets that have been discovered through Kepler and other observatories. So James Webb will continue to revolutionize our understanding of our universe. Hubble has rewritten textbooks. James Webb is advertised to be 100 times more potent
Right.
and more powerful.
Specifically, what might we learn about astrobiology as a result of those?
We might learn what the makeup of exoplanet number,
Okay.
whatever it is, what its atmosphere is.
And then, okay, good.
And that will tell us whether or not there is a possibility of life existing on an exoplanet.
Right. That's my hope as well. Thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Johnson. Not here. My apology. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
From Oregon, by the way.
Thank you. Ambassador Bolden, welcome back, and thanks as always for your informative testimony. We really appreciate that. I want to start by mentioning, as you did, the importance of investing in the earth science programs at NASA. I want to acknowledge the economic impact of that research, especially in the district I'm proud to represent. I can't overstate the importance of accurate climate and weather forecasting to my constituencies, from agriculture, the fishing community. So a continued investment in that underlying science that helps us understand climate is important and significant. I know that last year NASA inherited from NOAA some climate sensors that were formerly a part of the NOAA-funded JPSS program, but NASA only received funding for fiscal year 2014 for that activity. So has that been remedied going forward?
We think it is in the process of being remedied, and in fact, if I remember correctly, we plan to take the two sensors, the two climate sensors, and they will actually become a part of the International Space Station. We had the option of making them free flyers, which would have been relatively expensive. The Earth Science community working with the Human Exploration and Mission Operations Directorate. In our trying to enhance the utilization of station, we're beginning, as you may know, we're beginning to put more and more Earth Science missions on the International Space Station. That's where we intend to put them.
Terrific. Thank you. And then I wanted to follow up on the comments that were made by a couple of my colleagues already about the concern about investing in the education mission. And as someone who discusses that issue frequently both in this committee and the Education Committee, STEM education is a priority, of course, of many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle of our constituency. What I want to talk about today is the NASA Space Grant Program. Recently I met with representatives from the Oregon NASA Space Grant Consortium, and our conversation largely focused on the importance of keeping students engaged in STEM. And I'll tell you, there are a couple of examples that show how important this is. One of them is that students from McMinnville High School in my district on April 6th, coming right up, are doing a nano lab launch. And the difference that this is making to these students in McMinnville High School, they're thrilled that they have two separate nano labs going up to the ISS. They're so excited. And when we're talking about building people who want to work in this field, looking at someone who, also from Oregon, Victor Dang, who is now a full-time structures engineer for SpaceX, had an internship at the Johnson Space Center, said it was an amazing opportunity he couldn't have done without the Space Grant Program. Intern also at Ames Research Center, where he said the opportunity had an incredible impact on his career. It was his first industry experience, but it solidified his desire to pursue a career in aerospace. He said it was one of the most fun summers I ever had and inspired me to seek opportunities that would allow him to travel to new places. So as we're trying to build not only people to work in the field, but also make sure that the public understands the benefits of space exploration, can you talk a bit about how this space grant program is engaged in getting students into STEM fields, but also talk about the role in educating the public at large about NASA's educational work, and know that many of us are very concerned about the reductions in the educational
Very briefly, for the benefit of those who may not understand space grant and know very much about it, every state in the nation has a space grant consortium, and it is usually headquartered in the land grant institution of that state. So it is a dependable source of STEM reference and education for NASA. We have asked them over the past few years to extend their work actually down into the K through 12 level, where they were very uncomfortable at first. But they now, as a result of working with us on the Summer of Innovation, for example, which is probably where the young man in school has learned about STEM education, we now have the Space Grant Consortium in many states that are the responsible entity for making sure that Summer of Innovation is conducted in their states over a period of time. So it is a very good program.
And do you expect that that program is going to be cut because there are these sharp reductions in the educational activities?
One of the things that I never have to worry about is reductions in Space Grant. Space Grant and MUREP and other programs are those that we ask for what we think will be required to maintain them, and you all always help. So I'm not worried about funding for Space Grant.
Well, thank you, and almost out of time. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must admit that I'm somewhat astonished by your testimony that shifts responsibility from this administration to Congress for America's current inability to launch astronauts into space. Let's be clear for a moment. This administration made the unilateral 2010 decision to cancel NASA's human spaceflight Constellation program, thereby delaying America's return to human spaceflight. This administration made the decision to mothball our space shuttles and put them in museums rather than keeping them available should circumstances or emergencies dictate their use. This administration has grown America's welfare wealth transfer programs to over $750 billion per year, more than 40 times NASA's budget, welfare programs that put a higher priority on buying election votes, no matter the loss of funding for NASA, national defense, or other productive functions of the federal government. Now I hear testimony that this administration wants to invest in America, quote, unquote, when the Space Launch System, NASA's next human spaceflight program, was forced on this administration by Alabama Senator Richard Shelby and other senators and congressmen who believe in Americans' exceptionalism in space. With that as a backdrop, as you know, Russia is engaged in acts of war against the Ukraine in the Crimea. America's response has been rather anemic economic sanctions, sanctions designed to provide maximum domestic political cover without any hope of causing Russia to leave the Crimea. Recent intelligence information raises the concern that Russia may go beyond the Crimea and attack eastern Ukraine. All of this raises the specter that this administration will impose more economic sanctions, which in turn risk that Russia will respond by denying America access to the International Space Station. And they can do that because we're reliant on Russia to get to the International Space Station. In the time remaining, Mr. Administrator, please describe to this committee what NASA's plan is to put American astronauts on the International Space Station should Russia say they're no longer going to give us a ride to the space station.
Mr. Chairman, may I get the chart again? Because and Congressman Brooks, I'm not going to engage in a debate about history. It is a fact that the decision to phase out the shuttle was not made by the Obama administration. That decision was made following the recommendation of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board in 2004 under the Bush administration.
Excuse me, if I might interject. When the space shuttle was mothballed, President Obama was President of the United States.
That's right.
He could have made any decision he wanted to make. Wait a minute, let me finish. He could have made the decision to have continued to use the space shuttle, or he could have made the decision to keep it available in the event of emergencies. He chose not to.
Mr. Congressman Brooks, I will just make one statement. I was the one who recommended to the President that we phase the shuttle out. I would have recommended we phase it out quicker. I just mentioned we were spending $12 billion over the same period of time that we have spent $12.5 billion on SLS and Orion now.
Okay, let me interject again. No, wait a second. You said you were not going to go over history. You were able to divert from my question to history. My question was, if Russia cuts us off today because of the events in the Ukraine or elsewhere in the world, what is NASA's plan to get us to that space station?
Congressman, we engage in contingency planning every single day. Contingency planning for Russia refusing to take us to the International Space Station is something that I consider to be feasible right now, because Russia is dependent upon the United States to operate the International Space Station. When it comes to power, when it comes to everyday operations, that's all done by the United States. Russia has one thing that we need: access. if the International Space Station...
Okay, back to my question.
Is
Is it your testimony that America has no plan? Because you don't think it's a possibility to worry about?
This is like asteroids. We have a plan. The plan needs to be funded. The plan is commercial crew. If the Congress chooses not to fund commercial crew, this nation has no plan.
Okay, I have looked at your written statement, and it says, and consistent with your oral statement, that basically we're looking at the end of 2017, which is 3.5 years away. Is that the plan if Russia decides to terminate our access to the International Space Station?
Congressman Brooks, I am confident, based on my conversation with my Russian counterparts, that they are equally worried about terminating activity on the International Space Station. So, I'm not going to deal in suppositions. I don't expect that our partners will abandon the International Space Station, which would be...
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I see my time is expiring. I appreciate the witness's insight, but if all I'm hearing is that our only plan is 3.5 years away, I have to worry about what happens if Russia does cut us off as our relationship with Russia continues to deteriorate based on Russian acts of war in the Ukraine and Crimea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me.
I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Edwards. Let's not dwell on the past. Let's actually look to the future and think about where we want to go, because that is what we do. We're informed by the past, but we also plan for the future. General Bolden, just playing off of what my colleague talked about, it's my impression that we also have leverage with regards to the International Space Station.
Exactly.
So, in a partnership, we've got that leverage. They've got some leverage. But the end goal, if we're looking toward the future, is commercial space travel and moving folks forward. When I do look at the building blocks, it also in our conversations previously, we do really have a long-term goal to have human space travel to Mars, and you're laying out some steps here and so forth. I had a chance to visit the SpaceX plant down in Southern California recently, and it does look like they're also fairly quickly advancing. Obviously, they've been able to take supplies up to the space station, and they're now also advancing fairly quickly on commercial space travel with humans. Can you give us an update about the partnership between NASA and the commercial space entities and so forth?
I think we should all be proud that that during the period of time that I've been the NASA administrator in the Obama administration, we have stood up a commercial cargo capability. So we are not dependent on any international partners anymore for getting cargo to space. We are diligently working with some of those same partners plus others to bring about a capability in the United States to have a commercial crew capability. NASA does not deal in low Earth orbit access anymore, nor should we, because we have to use that money in order to execute a deep space exploration program.
Great. And can you expand on the asteroid retrieval mission as a building block and a step into going to deep space as well as returning from deep space?
There are things that we need if we want to go to Mars. And I hope that all of us in this room, particularly those on the committee, will agree with me that NASA's, America's, the world's ultimate goal in our lifetime is to see humans on Mars. If I can get the chart back up, because it would really be helpful. In order to get to Mars, there are things we don't have. We don't have sufficient propulsion to take cargo there, because you don't want to have to utilize your crew vehicle to take cargo. It would take multiple SLS missions to get the amount of cargo to Mars to sustain a human inhabitation there. We need increased capability in something like solar electric propulsion.
Right.
We need to be able to test it. And so our proving ground is the Earth-Moon system, cislunar orbit, where we intend to take the asteroid so that we can interact with it. We can fly Orion there. We can do things. We can develop procedures for extravehicular activity. We can develop procedures for proximity operations, things that we cannot do in low Earth orbit, because that system is different than what we know in low Earth orbit. So I need a proving ground. The moon is 2 days away. If something goes wrong there, we can come home. Once we launch to Mars in the 2030s, the crew is 8 months away. So imagine Apollo 13. The crew survived because it was a loop around the moon, and nature took care of it, to be quite honest. an Apollo 13-like incident, the side of the service module blows out right after liftoff, we're going 8 months to Mars, and then another 8 months to come back or more. So we've got to get it right, and our proving ground is cislunar orbit with the asteroid mission, where we can develop the life support systems that are robust. We can't have a cooling system that fails. We can't have the kinds of things that happen sometimes now on the International Space Station. That's why station is used to develop the technologies. They've got to be better, got to be more robust.
And again, if we stick with this theme of wanting to be forward-looking, wanting to dream, which is what we did as kids, right? When we looked at the Apollo missions and putting a person on the moon, we dreamt big, and then we went out and did it.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do right now. With this goal of human space travel to Mars, it is going to, we don't know how we're going to get there just yet, but we've got to think about those technologies, and we've got to start making those investments. Would that be accurate?
That's very accurate. We also, it is now time for us, and I've asked our people to start thinking about, okay, it is now, we're approaching 2030, SLS and Orion have been proven, we're getting ready to go to Mars. What should we be thinking about now? You got to get to the surface. We haven't even started talking about landers. We have not even started talking about surface systems. That's where the international partners and commercial partners are going to, I think, are going to be vital. Put the chart up one more time, because I need for people to visualize this. This is hard. If you look at Earth reliant, we cannot get to deep space. We can't sustain operations in deep space if we have to come back to Earth every time to pick up stuff. Congressman Rohrabacher knows this. We go through this all the time. We need things like cryogenic propellant and storage. I don't need it right now. So he and I disagree on what the timing is. We're in the just-in-time business. The reason I don't spend the money that you would like to have me spend on SLS is because I don't need a 130 metric ton vehicle right now. I do need a commercial vehicle that I can send my astronauts to low Earth orbit. Now, hopefully everyone agrees we're going to Mars. If we do, hopefully everyone agrees that we've got a crawl, walk, run, and this is a crawl, walk, run. We've got to have a proving ground to develop the technology.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Well, perhaps a crawl, walk, orbit would be.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
How did you know what I was going to ask?
I was hoping you would, because I need for people to be consistent in what they ask, and you have been consistent.
Boy, I didn't expect all these great compliments.
I try to speak the truth.
Thank you, General. Well, let's get to the first. I had two issues I wanted to talk to you about. One was what you brought up, refueling in space. And let me just note for the record, not all of us do believe that getting to putting people on the, on Mars should be our number one goal in space right now. Yeah. It is expensive, and making that our number one goal reflects taking away resources from other projects that might be more important to humankind than just what is a symbolic mission of putting a human being on the Mars, considering that we have robots and rovers and all sorts of other things that are on Mars already. But let's go to that. When we're talking about the option of refueling in space, would not that give us a great deal of leverage to accomplish other missions in space, perhaps on the moon, perhaps other goals that we would like to achieve at a much more cost-effective rate, because we wouldn't have to build such a huge rocket that the SLS is going to cost tens of billions of dollars?
We don't know that it would be much more cost-effective, because to get the type of depot in space, and we've talked about this before, the number of flights required to get the type of depot in space that we need is extensive. And so while an Atlas V or a Falcon 9 may cost significantly less than an SLS, by the time you fly 10, 12 Atlas Vs or Falcon 9s, you've exceeded the cost of an SLS. So for getting humans into deep space, for getting large payloads, large scientific payloads into deep space, you want something like an SLS, so we don't have to do these Venus flyby to Jupiter. We want to be able to go direct. SLS will give us that capability in time. We're not ready yet. We don't need that capability yet. So we do have to do, as you said, we need to orbit, cislunar orbit to develop the technologies, low Earth orbit to develop the technologies, and we're trying to do that. We are using ground tests right now for cryogenic propellant and storage. We're not going away from it.
I'm watching that closely, and let me just say that I think that presents us a much more cost-effective way of achieving specific goals, rather than heading for a goal that would be so expensive that it would drain other potential uses in space, projects in space. Now, let me ask you this. Are you confident that if an object from space that was discovered or there's an object in space that threatens to cause massive damage on our planet, are you confident that that object will be detected and that we can deflect it?
I am highly confident that that object can be detected. In fact, if there is an object that's larger than a kilometer that threatens Earth, we probably already have identified it, and it's in the 97% or 98% of those objects that have already been identified. We know when it's going to be, but nothing in the next 100 years in that category.
And I don't want to quibble.
If it's less than 140 meters, I'm less confident that we have identified. In fact, I know we have not identified it yet, but we're developing the capability to do that. Deflection, nothing. And Congressman Posey is probably going to ask me the same thing as he did in the asteroid. We are trying. The asteroid redirect mission will inform our. It won't. I don't want to fool people. We're not going to save the planet with the asteroid redirect mission. It will inform our capability to answer your question and his question from the asteroid hearing, which is, does the United States have the capability of protecting the planet if we can identify something fast enough? In the future, in the near future, when we fly the asteroid redirect mission, that will inform our ability to, for me or whoever's sitting in this chair then, to say, I am very confident that we can deflect anything that's inbound to Earth. Will inform us. Won't give us the capability.
I don't want to quibble, but the word can and will are two different things.
Okay.
That we will deflect an object that could destroy and murder millions of people. Let me ask you.
We will have that capability, I'm confident.
Okay. Is there, one last quickly here, is there an established procedure and chain of command to take the actions that would be necessary if we do spot this maybe 3% chance that there's a huge object headed towards us? Is there a chain of command and the necessary procedures to actually make the decisions and take over and get the job done?
There are procedures in place. There is a definite change of command, a chain of command. In fact, I'm going to be traveling to Langley Research Center next week. That is my devolution facility. Every year we practice a continuity of operations nationwide or government-wide. So I will be moving with my chief of staff and the associate administrator to Langley because something bad's happening to Washington. So that FEMA becomes a critical player in the role. The National Command Authority springs into action. The president is the guy that makes all the big decisions, and the National Security Council, and NASA's a teeny-weeny little player in there. We provide data as we continue to do.
If a near-Earth object was coming?
If a near-Earth object were coming, that would become an impending national disaster like a hurricane or other kinds of things, and there are distinct procedures in place to what FEMA would do with the nation to get prepared. Something like a near-Earth object, we don't presently have the capability, like a hurricane, to give you a percentage probability that's going to strike New York or, it's going to strike Earth. That's what we can tell you. And so, but we would have to prepare.
Thank you, General.
All right. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Beasley.
Hi, General Bolden, good morning. And wanted to touch on Russia again very quickly. Most recently, one of the official sanctioned because of the Ukraine crisis is Dmitry Rogozin, Deputy Premier of Defense and Space Industry. You have stated that if we provide NASA with the President's request for a commercial crew, we will have launch capability in 2017. So my question to you is, how can we accelerate our efforts to assure launch capability returns back to America?
The way to accelerate it in this case is more money, to be quite honest. I can't tell you when a company is going to think they're ready to fly, but all of our partners that have given us schedules, Sierra Nevada, for example, has a scheduled launch on an Atlas V, a demonstration flight for themselves. I want to say it's 2015 or 2016. So the companies are moving very rapidly as they can based on the funding that we've given them to be able to be ready to fly as soon as they can. I would be hesitant to say we could accelerate it any more than a year, but we could potentially accelerate it by a year if we were given adequate funding. And I can't say that about everything. I can say that, companies are poised.
Right, right. And speaking of funding, what are the impacts of reducing NASA's education programs? I think that Ami touched on it just a little bit.
NASA spends $17.6 billion on STEM education. I don't think people really get it. I spend a lot of time in classrooms. I spend a lot of time doing Skype. I spend a lot of time doing VTCs with schools because I can't go to every school. I don't make a trip anywhere, particularly outside the United States, that I don't do an outreach event and try to help our partner nations with their STEM education programs because everybody faces the same thing we do. Everyone's concerned about the reductions that they see in the Office of Education, but it is making us hungry to find new ways to collaborate with other agencies. We did a program with the Department of Education. It is their 21st Century Communities and Learning program. NASA essentially did the program for them because we could bring astronauts into the classroom via downlink TV from the International Space Station. We were paid $300,000 to kind of put it together. They invested $5 million. That probably would have cost the nation $10 million last year. But we are learning how to collaborate with each other. We are not, I know everybody's worried about losing money. We're finding that synergy among federal agencies is working for us. The 4-H is in every single county in this nation, every single county. NASA has, the Space Grant Consortium in 50 states. Compare every single county to 50 states. We're now talking about working collaboratively with 4-H. That's going to magnify greatly the number of kids that we're able to reach with STEM education enrichment. So I'm not worried about our ability to do our job. STEM outreach is us. I mean, we do that every day.
In your opinion, is there any way to evaluate, like whether or not these, like let's say that we make cuts to the programs, are there real ways to evaluate whether or not these cuts are having an impact on future achievement or we talk a lot in this committee about being able to aspire young people to want to reach, certain goals as it relates to, STEM-related jobs.
Without a doubt. NASA's education program this year, for the first time, is outcome-based, which means you got to have metrics. So we are looking at, now, we are not allowed, because of privacy, we can't map a child from elementary school through college. The Department of Education can. The National Science Foundation can because they're authorized to do those kinds of things. So by our collaborating with DOE, with the Department of Education and the National Science Foundation, they can do the metrics that tell us, okay, how many kids that participated in Summer of Innovation last summer, 10 years from now, are doctors or lawyers or things like that. Those are the metrics about which you speak. And although I can't do it, I can get it now based on the collaborations that we have. And it's taken time. Everybody wants to see something now. We just started Summer of Innovation. We had to battle to get it. I think it's been around now 4 years. And we are now seeing factual data, not anecdotal data. We're looking at numbers of kids.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I had a chance to thank Seth, and I had a chance to thank Bob Cabana for the common sense, no-cost outreach that NASA did to reach thousands of people who were indifferent pretty much previously to space and now seem to be enthusiastic about it. And I just hadn't had a chance to thank you personally for for that, and I think it's great. That's how we help spread the message. A couple of things, as to funding, I don't think any of us are where we would like to be with funding, but I think we're in a whole lot better place than we were a year ago with the uncertainty about sequestration, and so I'm trying to look at a glass half full in that regard, pretty much as you are. We need a deep space plan. Moon and Mars, there's no doubt about that, and we also need low Earth orbit options. So I know it's tight balancing that, and in space politics, you're always going to have some that want all one way and some that want the other way, and I hope that we will continue to understand that we do need both and go forward like that. A concern that I have, and I discussed it briefly with Dr. Holdren yesterday, and he referred to a recent agreement that NASA has with Department of Energy over our space fuel supply. I wonder if you could bring me up to date on that a little bit.
Yes, sir. We have reached an agreement with DOE. They produce the plutonium pellets that we need, and so we're still in negotiations right now, trying to understand how do we help them improve their facilities. Just the infrastructure that's needed to press the pellets for propulsion. We have enough right now in our stockpile to be able to fly the missions that are presently on the books for us, Mars 2020 and the like. But we have to work better with DOE to make sure that they can make the improvements to their infrastructure so that they can efficiently make the pellets that we need. We have lots of fuel, but it's old, and it needs new fuel, to mix in it to make it good. So
they're not in the process of destroying any or getting rid of any that you're aware of, or using it for anything else other than space?
I will have to take that for the record. I don't know the answer to that, sir.
Would you just find out? I would kind of like that assurance that it's not being used elsewhere for other things, or.
Yeah, I will, and I'll take that for the record. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, General. Any other comments you'd like to make about keeping on track with both?
It's a balance. And I come to this hearing, I feel better about where we are than ever before, to be quite honest. I just wish, I wanted to commend the chairman and ranking member because of the way they're working together. We got to do better than we're doing. I don't want to sit here and say what was the responsibility of the Bush administration, what happened in the Obama administration. As Congressman Barra said, what's done is done. We can't undo that. We can make a difference for the future. The thing that I will say is, what I'm talking about, none of us are going to be sitting around here in charge. I had some young people, MLLP, they had to leave mid-level leadership program. They're young, growing leaders in NASA, and they just wanted to see how we do this stuff. That's who's going to do all this stuff we're talking about. Deep space exploration is hard, and we cannot jump to Mars. We have to develop the technologies. We've got to be confident that our systems are going to work. That's why, when Chairman Smith asked about a Mars flyby is great, but it doesn't do anything for us in terms of deep space exploration. If the crew survives, and I have doubts about that, that's why I'm not a fan of a one-time Mars flyby. Okay, we've done a one-time Mars flyby. As great as Apollo was, and it was awesome, we never stayed on the surface of the moon for more than days. If we're going to go to the surface of the moon, we better stay there for a month or 2 months, or we're not going to learn anything about the impact of less than 1 gravity on the brain or on other kind of...
But do we agree, unless at some point there's the ability to leave this Earth, the survival of our species is threatened?
I'm not a fatalist, but we do need to be able to be a multi-planet species.
A realist. We're trying to look at eternity. We're trying to look at the future.
One of these days our sun, you and I won't see it, Nobody we know will see it, but one of these days our sun's going to burn out. It's a star. And it would be nice if we have become a multi-planet species by then, and we're not just on Mars. By then, people will be living in other solar systems because the solar system will go away. We got to get beyond. Like my granddaughter says, she says, "OG, you're thinking about Mars. I'm going way beyond that," and she's right. when the sun gives out, this solar system goes away.
We have to think about planting trees
Yes,
for
other
future
places.
generations
Yes.
the
Exactly.
shade from which we'll never expect to have.
You're right.
And I like Neil deGrasse Tyson when he says, you know, space is truly the only investment we make for future generations.
Yes, sir. I agree.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and General. Part of what I want to sort of have a quick dialogue is just the mechanics internally under your review of how you set priorities and the decision making and the inputs and those things, because you know, I know you have a lot of voices and a lot of people tugging on your coat saying we want this, we want that. Something like Sophia.
Yes.
Because now that was really coming online just within the last 12 months or so, correct?
Sophia is it's been under development for probably 10 years.
But in full, you know, with collection.
It was beginning to fly and fly well.
So internally, when you're doing your prioritizations and mechanics, tell me the review process you go over, and let's just use Sophia just because I'm somewhat familiar with that, on how you prioritize a program like that you have a decade of time and money.
Inside the Science Mission Directorate, they have, I forget what they call their council, but every year they get the wise people of the science community, and they evaluate our programs to see, okay, what I've asked them to do for me right now is we got a lot of programs that have been flying for a long time, long past their planned lifetime. They are expensive. We have to pay for those. So when we prioritize what we're going to get from our science portfolio, we try to make sure we have a balance, Earth, space, everything. And Sophia ended up in the prioritization. Sophia was down here. When you talk about James Webb getting ready to come online, Spitzer, other sources of data that's very similar to what Sophia gives us. Sophia is a unique asset.
Well, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I'm reaching back. Because I remember it may have been a year or so ago, you were actually somewhat a fan of Sophia.
I am a fan of Sophia. I'm a fan of anything that has wings.
So mechanically, share with me the internal process under your authority tree on how they would prioritize Sophia.
Yeah.
I mean, and how it ended up where it is.
We would go to the science community and ask how, based on what we expect to get in our budget, what do you want to continue to operate? And the one thing I keep cautioning is, if we are going to put new systems online, if we're going to bring about new technology, better sensors than we have today, what are you going to give up? Because the science community doesn't like to give up anything.
But does that become more of a conversation of let's enhance what we have, or is it to cancel or
Well, you never say, what are we going to cancel? That is not a question. The question is, how do we operate within our budget and provide science responses to the scientific objectives set by the decadal surveys, set by the outside advisory committee, set by Congress?
So right now you sort of understand your budget request and where you see things going. Tell me where Sophia sits
low
in that. So it just is a low priority.
Because it is not a low priority. I said that flippantly, and I shouldn't have said that. In comparison with other projects in the science portfolio, Sophia did not rise to the level that we decided we were either going to terminate another program or we have options with Sophia. And as Dr. Holdren mentioned, I think yesterday, we do have options with Sophia. We don't know what the 2015 budget is going to be.
So when
we could end up with enough money that we have not stopped flying Sophia. Everybody's panicking. We are working with our German partners to find ways that we can enhance the utilization of Sophia for the rest of this fiscal year. We may not put it into upgrade, for example.
But when you're doing your layers of priorities, opportunity, growth, and security initiative, and those, I'm trying to get a better understanding of how something like this falls into building those priorities.
There, I'm trying to bite it. If you look at the at our list of things in the Opportunity Growth Security Initiative, almost every one of them is something that is either in existence right now, and I'm trying to buy down risk. $150 million to commercial crew. If the Congress grants our request for 848, takes it to $1 billion. That's buying down risk.
Okay, and just because my time, and I had two quick, do you think the Germans would be willing to take on more of the heavy lift on the cost and mechanics?
That is one of the alternatives. However, to be very candid, they don't seem to be willing to do that.
If we put their flag first on the airplane. Okay.
Well, no. We are looking at all alternatives for Sophia. I will have to say, though, Sophia is a joint project. The United States, NASA, is unable to assume all responsibility for Sophia.
Okay. My second, and this is just because it's outside my skill set, space station.
Yes.
How long can it go unmanned? If it sat there for, is there sort of when you cross over a maintenance curve? I'm sort of curious if there's a data point.
You don't want to go. I will have to take that for if you really want me to tell you how long we can go if we deorbit.
Yeah. No. If let's say it sat up there for 36 months,
it can't sit up there for 36 months unoccupied. We've got to have people that are repairing. The ammonia pump that went out, that was an emergency. That was a contingency for which we had to do a contingency spacewalk and all that. If there's no crew, that doesn't get done.
So in many ways for maintenance and just sort of you almost have to constantly keep it touched.
You talk about leverage. Everybody's excited because the Russians have the leverage on transportation. When you talk about navigation, communications, power, the United States has significant leverage on the international space.
Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry. I just looked at the clock and I was having fun here. Thank you for your patience.
You asked great questions.
All great questions. Now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's nothing wrong, Congressman, with having some fun.
Around here it is.
Yeah, okay. General Bolden, my question really surrounds the chart you've already showed and the human exploration roadmap that's in both the authorization bills in the Senate and the House, as well as the minority's version, that we need to help assess us in the merits of the asteroid retrieval mission. So the chart you've been showing a little bit today doesn't outline what you want to call the specific set of capabilities and technologies required to extend human presence to the surface of Mars, or the mission sets necessary to demonstrate the proficiencies of these capabilities that the House version asked for. It doesn't include the information on the phasing of planned intermediate destinations, Mars, mission risk areas, and the potential risk mitigation approaches that are required by the bill offered by Ms. Edwards. Mm-hmm. And it does not include a description of the utility of an expanded human presence in cislunar space toward enabling missions to various lunar orbits, the lunar surfaces, asteroids, the Mars system, and other destinations of interest. So, until the administration provides the detailed information on the asteroid retrieval mission, including how it fits into a broader exploration architecture, I assume Congress is going to continue to view some of this project skeptically, which brings me to the question. NASA's budget request includes $180 million for the asteroid redirect mission. So last year at the budget hearing, I wasn't here, but I have been informed that you told the committee that a mission formulation review would be done over the summer. But now it's been a year since the mission was announced. NASA has not completed the mission formulation review, and what I was told is just last week you released a broad agency announcement for information and held an open forum yesterday to solicit even more input. So when is NASA going to actually have a plan for the mission that the committee can review, and how can you be sure that the mission is, in fact, a stepping stone to Mars, as the BAA claims, without a human exploration roadmap?
My estimate would be that over the next year we will continue to refine the concept for the asteroid redirect mission. There are two big potential ways that we could do it right now, and that's what we're evaluating. That's the reason we continue to go to the community, industry, academia and entrepreneurs, to be quite honest, trying to determine whether we want to use a small is a relative term, where we grasp the asteroid and fly along with it and thrust against it, or whether we go to a large asteroid, take a large boulder from it. So that has to be determined, and that will determine the specifics of the mission, what type vehicle you use and everything. We know that no matter what we do, we're going to need solar electric propulsion. So we have identified that as a if you will, a hurdle to being able to do an asteroid redirect mission. Also a hurdle to getting to Mars, because we know that's what we're going to use for cargo.
Well, you know, in the tough budget environment we're in, clearly I would say the more information you can provide to Congress, the more likely you can get buy-in. And if things start to slip or commitments are made and not met, I think you can understand that that's viewed problematically. And again, what I was told was yesterday when NASA presented to the scientific community, it was the opinion of some that the information that was presented was a broader set of data and information than has already been shared with this committee or with Congress. So, you know, in a priority setting, I guess I would just simply encourage NASA to give us more data than we asked for, so that, you know, we're not feeling as though we're left out of the loop or that we're not important, because you can understand the result if that is the feeling, which I think it is somewhat.
I appreciate and intend to respond to that request, and I would hope, I look at the staff in the back, I am told that we have been regularly briefing the staff on the progress with the asteroid redirect mission. So if that's not true, somebody shake their head, no, that's not true, and I will go back and...
Well, I think the staff should be shaking their head no, because clearly, as someone new to the committee, very directly, they asked me to probe this because they don't feel like it's been so. So there's a...
Have they not been getting any information or not been getting sufficient information?
Well, not sufficient. If you're not getting sufficient information, you might as well not get
Robert Lightfoot, who is my associate administrator, usually he leads the team up here. If it's insufficient information, it's because we don't know. If it is no information, it's because I'm being misled in thinking that they're coming up.
Well, I don't think anyone would suggest it's no information, but to some extent, insufficient information means decisions can't be made.
It means we don't have enough information to make an informed decision. That's all it means.
Well, again, I would just encourage you, and I don't think it's saying anything new, just the more information you can get this committee, the more likely you'll see.
Exactly, and I understand that. And again, I'll go back to my comments earlier. There are big things happening. I would encourage people, part of getting ready for the asteroid redirect mission is having a vehicle to take the crew. If you go to the Kennedy Space Center, you will see Orion. It's a spacecraft. It's not a drawing, and it will fly next fall. This coming before the end of the year. If you go to Michoud, you will see components of SLS that are under construction, whether they're barrel assemblies for the fuel tank or whether they're domes or whatever. That's real hardware. We're not talking about drawings anymore, and that's all a part of getting to the asteroid redirect mission. So that may not be sufficient, but that's all we have is hardware. If that's not sufficient, I don't know how to do better.
Thank you, General Bolton. My time's expired. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. Great questions by all the members of the committee. At this time, General, you're not going to get off without a second round of questions.
That's good.
So I'll open it up for myself. And this is similar to a follow-up on commercial crew. Last year, the Associate Administrator, Bill Gerstenmaier, said basically 90% of all the development costs for the commercial crew is being paid for by the American taxpayer. And we know that the commercial crew contract is going to be similar to what the cargo was, anywhere from $7 to $11 billion or greater. So we're just thinking. You mentioned that if you don't get the funding, that the schedule will slip beyond 2017. Is there anything that NASA can actually do to entice these companies to actually put more skin into the game, perhaps?
Mr. Chairman,
and if yes or no,
I am confused by a number you just gave. Our total expenditure, unless my charts are wrong, the total expenditure on COTS over the 5 years that I've been the NASA administrator from the taxpayer was we were appropriated $782 million, and we obligated $780.
Yeah, we're not talking
not
about
even
cost,
a billion.
talking about commercial crew. And
Well,
I'm talking about the value of the contracts that these companies are going to receive from $7 to $11 million. Estimated value for flying, cargo and crew. So I'm saying, we're basically paying 90% of the development costs.
Well, that's what the $782 million
right. Is there a way to get them to maybe put more money into the program?
They do. That's the reason. That's why I mentioned earlier when you said how have we managed to stay on cost? Oh, I mean on target, on schedule. If you haven't given us what we asked for, it's because the companies have paid more than they would have normally paid. That's the only way they can produce hardware.
Yeah.
We only paid them what we had. So I would have to go back. I'll take for the record to verify the 90% number. I would be surprised if we're paying 90% of the cost of commercial crew development to this date. I would be really surprised.
That's from a hearing that we had September 14th, 2012.
And I'm told the information is proprietary, but I'll go back and I'll take that for the record.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. At this time, I recognize the ranking member.
Thanks. Just very quickly, I do want to follow this up because earlier when you mentioned, I thought you had misspoken that the industry participants of the commercial crew program were providing more money than NASA. That doesn't seem to be the information that we have. So is it possible for you to provide the committee with the amounts that each of the even at some level, the amounts that each of the industry participants is putting in and NASA so that we can see that? Because otherwise, I think all of us are under the impression that NASA, that the taxpayer is actually providing the bulk of the support for commercial crew. Is that wrong?
I will take that for the record.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And then you also, and you can hear that. I don't think we've coordinated our questions for you, but what you can hear is a concern around the asteroid retrieval mission. And so I wonder if you would be prepared by a date certain to provide the committee with a roadmap and the analysis of the various options that there would be testing different kinds of technology for this plan to Mars. And so some of us, for example, have thought, well, maybe the moon makes sense as a sort of test bed. Others, the ISS, and others, the asteroid retrieval mission, or maybe some combination. But when would you be able to provide a roadmap with the analysis comparing these options and the technologies that would be derived to the committee?
Congresswoman, I'll go back. It was my impression, because I keep referring to it every time I come forward. We have two matrices. One shows human ratings, human performance, human concerns. The other one shows technology gaps. And we have had that. I look at that. I've been looking at it for a couple of years, and I thought we made that available to the committee, which shows these are things that we are accomplishing on the International Space Station. These are things that we will accomplish with the asteroid redirect mission. But I will take that for the record and go back and make sure we have shared those matrices with your staffs and with you, because I thought we had done
what about lunar? So here's what we're wrestling with here. We have some different ideas on this committee about what makes sense, but if you all aren't providing us with a real roadmap that outlines the technologies and then maybe says, here's our scientific analysis about why this doesn't make sense over the other, it would help us to make a more informed decision from a budget perspective and from an authorizing perspective of what it is that we need to, to look at. And I think that the questions that you've heard on the committee go to that point. It would help the chairman and I very much to have that in hand, and it would help for you to say, here's a date certain by which NASA can give that to us. Okay. I want to incorporate that date, quite frankly, if we're to do an authorization, because then we can come back and evaluate what makes sense going forward, and that deeply impacts budget. And don't leave the moon out, because you can hear the concern here on the committee.
We won't leave the moon out, but
I'm not saying that's where I am personally.
Well, but
it's a
I'm just
concern in
saying,
the committee.
I can state with certainty the reason the moon, we don't talk about it, is because there is no technological advantage to go to the moon. There is no challenge technologically to go to the lunar surface except money.
So in providing something to this committee, it would be very helpful to have that analysis, to have the scientific, sort of basis for that decision, and also to have the buy-in collectively from the community about a direction. Because I think if we had that, we'd make some very important decisions about what direction
we will attempt to do
go.
that. I have to caution, hoping that the community, whichever community you're talking about, if you're talking about the science community, hopefully buy-in is not all will agree. That will never happen.
Okay.
There is the lunar community, and they are not in favor of anything. Now we're talking about ideologues. So there is a community.
Give us an analysis, and then let us know who's for and against. I mean, an analysis that will help us in our decision making, so that what you want and what NASA needs is for this committee all to be on the same page about the direction. That will help you as well as it will help us. Thank you.
I'll take that.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, back to the issue with Russia and our ability to get to the International Space Station. What would be the consequences to the operational capabilities of the space station if within the next year Russia chooses to deny us access by no longer allowing us to hitch a ride on their rockets?
As I mentioned before, because we provide navigation, communications, power, and as I responded to somebody else, station would probably, and I hate to deal in conjecture, the partners would probably have to shut the space station down.
And if the space station is shut down...
If you're thinking that the Russians will continue to operate the International Space Station, can't be done.
And if the space station is shut down for an extended period of time, say years
I don't
or less?
need it. I will not need it. I will come to this. I will go to the President and recommend that we terminate SLS and Orion, because without the International Space Station, I have no vehicle to do the medical tests, the technology development, and we're fooling everybody that we can go to deep space if the International Space Station is not there. That's the reason that we and Roscosmos and ESA and JAXA and everyone agree that, hey, no matter what else is going on the surface of Earth, if we want to do this global exploration roadmap to which 12 different nations signed up, we have to have the International Space Station. That's the reason that the President said, okay, I'll agree to extend it to 2024, and we're going, I mean, I don't want anyone to think that I need an SLS or Orion if I don't have the International Space Station.
Well, let me make sure I understand the sequence of events from your testimony.
Very, very plainly.
Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events from your testimony, and you correct me if I err. If the Russians deny us access to the International Space Station, it's your testimony that because of what services we provide to the International Space Station, you would have to shut it down. And if the International Space Station is shut down, you in turn would then see no reason to have the Space Launch System or Orion, so is it fair for me to infer that you would then recommend that those programs be shut down too?
And I need to correct what I said if I said it. I don't know that the Russians denying us access, you're assuming that they come today and say, okay, you're not going anymore, and we're not going to bring your crew home, so figure out how to get them home. I don't think that any of those contingencies are going to happen.
Well, I understand that there are probabilities that are involved.
You're giving me, and I don't accept that as a viable supposition.
I'm one of those that believes in planning for all contingencies. It's much like the effort to acquire an asteroid.
We didn't plan on the
I don't think that the odds
contingencies.
of an asteroid hitting us in the next few years are very big, but nonetheless, to me, that is an interesting mission because of the risk associated with one eventually hitting Earth and our having the capability of being able to thwart that. Granted, the Russians may not, over the next couple of years, shut us off from access to the International Space Station, and all they have to do is deny us the ride that we keep thumbing with them, which they if they're willing to attack other nations, it doesn't seem beyond the realm of possibility that they also might be willing to deny American astronauts rides to the International Space Station. But having said that, if the International Space Station is shut down for any extended period of time, can it be resuscitated?
I will take that for the record. Anything can be done. You're asking for suppositions, Congressman Brooks.
Well, I'm asking for your expertise and insight on that subject.
I am not an expert on the environmental control and life support system of the International Space Station. So I said I will take that for the record.
Thank you.
I mean, there is no either or in terms of SLS and Orion and commercial crew. And I don't know how many ways to say that.
All right.
I know there are a lot of you who would like to say...
Thank you. You've answered my question.
Bear with me.
Well, if the chairman will give me another minute in order to ask one other question.
This is the last thing I will say. If I don't have commercial crew and I can't get to low Earth orbit, I don't need SLS and Orion. I showed you the exploration roadmap. If I can't get to low Earth orbit, there is no exploration program.
All right, if I could go to my final question then. There was a study done entitled Human and Nature Dynamics, Modeling Inequality and Use of Resources on the Collapse of Sustainability of Societies. And it concluded in part that income inequality contributes to the collapse of societies. It has come to my attention that the study also states, quote, this work was partially funded through NASA/GSFC grant NNX12AD03A, end quote, and that NASA contributed $26,000 to a study on income inequality, or that involved income inequality. Why is NASA spending money that should be related to space exploration, at least in my view, on income inequality issues?
NASA did not request such study. We did not endorse such study. We have not reviewed such study. The study was done at the University of Maryland as an offshoot of a study we did request on another subject. We don't control what a principal investigator chooses to do if they can get additional studies in.
But it's your money. It's $26,000 in NASA funding. Are you telling me that NASA doesn't control what this money is being spent on?
An investigator performs the study that we request, and if they choose to amplify the study with additional information or additional data for their own use, we don't prohibit them from doing that.
Well, thank you for sharing that information.
It is not a NASA study, neither endorsed nor requested by us.
But paid for by NASA, in part.
You got it.
Time has expired. At this time, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter. Oh, I'm so sorry. At this time, I recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Bolden, for staying for a second round of questions. I wanted to follow up on the international partnerships and international cooperation, which we've talked about a lot in this subcommittee, and we all appreciate the importance of it. And we've had some discussions about that this morning. But what I wanted to talk about is, in light of the proposal to shut down SOFIA, what are the risks of the international partners coming to view NASA as an unreliable partner, for example? What has been the response of the international community when they found out about the SOFIA proposal?
Well, the only members of the international community concerned about SOFIA so far have been the Germans, because that is our principal partner there. And before we announced the budget, Dr. Jan Werner and I had a long telephone conversation, and that's where we decided that we would set up a co-chaired working group to look at options for SOFIA, and that's what I referred to earlier. A final decision on SOFIA has not been made because we don't know what the 2015 budget is going to say. But as Congressman Brooks says, we are planning for the contingency that we don't get additional money in the science budget for SOFIA, and that would mean that we would then have to phase out put it in mothballs.
Well, and to follow up on that, even though Germany may be directly the only partner that has expressed concern, what kind of message does that send to the rest of the international community? And have you heard any response from others about questioning why this might happen?
A good example would be ExoMars, which everyone was up in arms when we announced that we were having to step back from the initial agreements on ExoMars. When NASA entered into agreement with the European Space Agency on ExoMars, times were better. We were going to provide launch vehicles for the 2016 mission, the 2018 mission. When the 2013 budget was about to come out, I talked to the European partners and I said, look, we had teams in Paris. This was leading into Christmas. And I said, this doesn't make sense. You know, we've got teams working on all this stuff, and I don't know what the 2013 budget's going to be. I cannot in good conscience allow the teams to keep working towards something that we may not be able to support. I said, give us time. Let us look at the budget, and then we'll determine what happens. When the 2013 budget came out, we found out we couldn't provide the launch vehicles that we had earlier promised. They went and negotiated, and Russia, as a partner in ExoMars, agreed that they would do that. We agreed that we could hold up our end of the bargain on a communications package for 2016 and a very important scientific package on 2018. So the partners understood where we were. They go through the same thing. It's just that when they back out of something or they don't make a payment, it doesn't make the front page of the New York Times the way it does when the United States does it.
Thank you. And I asked you earlier about earth science. I want to ask you a question about planetary science. Can you talk a little bit about the continued cuts being proposed for NASA's planetary science program and whether that's consistent in light of the work that NASA plans to undertake on a Mars 2020 rover? How can the cuts to the planetary science program be consistent?
We are holding to a planetary science portfolio that we have brought to this committee and others for a long time. Mars 2020 is still on track. We have to find ways, innovative ways to do missions when budgets are reduced. And our budget has been constantly reduced over time. As I said, the President requested a certain amount since I've been the NASA administrator, and the amount appropriated has always been less than that was requested. And that's forgotten by most people. We have taken the resultant appropriations and we have figured out alternative ways to do things. Sometimes you de-scope a mission. Sometimes you have to cancel it, but we've really canceled very few missions in the time that I've been the NASA administrator because we've been able to find alternatives to how to do it.
Thank you. And even though that may be forgotten by most people, I doubt that it's forgotten by people on the subcommittee. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. At this time, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Planetary Society that has been shared with the minority ahead of time. Hearing no objection.
Mr. Chairman, may I get a copy of the letter, or can you remind me or refresh my memory of what it is, because I get all kinds of stuff.
You don't get the right.
I don't get to see it. Okay.
But we'll get you a copy of the letter, of course, in the attachment. So at this time,
is it good or bad? Can you give me a hint?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
They want more money for Mars and
answer it the way you answer mine.
Do they like Europa?
General Bolden, thank you. Thank you for your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. The witness is excused, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very productive. Oh, you're welcome.
And to make tough choices. It means setting politics aside and investing strategically in our future. I am ready to work together to ensure the priorities from previous legislation that the President signed will be honored. The future of our space program depends on it. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to General Bolden for being here today with us. I appreciate holding a hearing to review the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's budget for fiscal year 2015, and I want to welcome, of course, Administrator Bolden. Also congratulate NASA and all of its contractor, private sector workforce on a number of successful launches and milestones that they've achieved over this past year. I am and always have been, will be, a passionate person about NASA and our space program and the people who work in it. Our space program, has been a symbol of our greatness as a nation, a means for peaceful collaboration with other nations, a bedrock of our capacity for innovation, and a powerful source of inspiration for student and professional engagement in science and technology. NASA will continue to be these things and more, but only if we provide it with the stability and resources needed to meet its multi-mission responsibilities in aeronautics, space science, earth science, human spaceflight, and human exploration. That's why I'm pleased that the $18.3 billion proposed for NASA for fiscal year 2015, which incorporates the funding being requested as part of the Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative, is close to the level specified for fiscal year 2015 in the NASA Authorization Act, the bill that I and full committee ranking member Johnson introduced last July. I support the President's growth initiative to make further investments in research and development that will help grow the nation's economy and create jobs. That said, I recognize that there will be much discussion about this initiative, so we need to understand the impacts to NASA's programs if the agency is only provided the base level request of $17
million cut could derail those efforts. This is simply unacceptable. These critical assets are the essential components of our future deep space human exploration efforts. The administration cannot in the same breath claim to support space exploration while continuing to divert agency budgets in a manner that undermines that mission. The agency must be mission-focused and budget vigilant, and that is why I will continue to work for appropriate funding levels for these systems. Just as in years past, the administration is requesting large increases in the commercial crew program without any data to back up the request. One of my top priorities as chairman of this subcommittee, especially in times of international uncertainty, is ensuring we restore the capability to launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil as soon as possible. Our commercial partners are the key to making that possible, as they relieve us from relying on the Russians for access to the International Space Station. But in times of budget constraint, we must be sure we are doing the best we can with what we have. This proposal should be accompanied by a strategic acquisition plan and other planning documents in order to justify the administration's budget request increase of $152 million. Additionally, this year's budget request also includes the cancellation of the SOFIA program. American taxpayers invested $1.2 billion on this one-of-a-kind asset, and the administration is proposing cancellation just as it gets off the ground. Administrator Bolden, he said you might be more helpful in answering questions we have about the proposed cancellation of SOFIA. I would hate to see us cancel yet another international partnership in the same manner as we did with the ExoMars project. I am moved to ask, how can the international community rely on this administration to collaborate on anything without fear of cancellation? There's no doubt that our nation's space program is facing many challenges. That is all the more reason the administration must deliver budgets and goals that support a serious commitment to human exploration and stop using the Science Mission Directorate as a partisan football. The scientists and engineers who work every day to maintain U.S. leadership in space are counting on you. The American public is counting on the President, and they are counting on each of us here in this room to have an honest conversation about where we are at this time in our nation's space program. The Subcommittee on Space will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing titled A Review of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Budget for Fiscal Year 2015. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth and testimony disclosure for today's witness. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Mr. Administrator, I will begin my statement this morning with a sincere thank you for your leadership and the hard work of all the men and women at NASA. While I do not always agree with the administration's decisions, I appreciate the good people at NASA and their service to the country. The President's budget request this year for NASA is $17.4 billion, a decrease of $186 million relative to the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was signed by the President only 2 months ago. I am most concerned by the administration's insistence on reordering the funding priorities of the agency. The Consolidated Appropriations Act provided clear priorities to the administration. In fact, Administrator Bolden heaped praise on the appropriation for NASA the day it passed. And yet we see again that the President has chosen to realign those priorities he agreed to in both the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 and the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Again this year, the administration is proposing funding for the Asteroid Redirect Mission, or ARM. There is still no budget profile, program office, or schedule for this mission. So we are in the same position we were a year ago when it was first announced. The Consolidated Appropriations Act directed NASA to produce more information on this mission before further investments will be considered. I hope to hear from the Administrator today that these plans are under development and that the agency is also taking ongoing concerns from many in the scientific community and its own advisory groups into consideration. At the same time, the Administration has requested these additional funds for the ARM. Cuts have been made to top agency and congressional priorities. For the fourth year in a row, the Administration has requested a reduction to the Orion crew capsule and the Space Launch System. This year's budget requests cut these programs by $330 million. As Administrator Bolden stated the day the appropriations bill passed, the bill keeps NASA's deep space exploration program on track. Surely, if $1.6 billion would only keep the SLS and Orion on track, a $219 million
work on reauthorizing NASA. I want to commend you and your staff, Mr. Chairman, for working with our team, because I think that we can get from here together on the same page as Republicans and Democrats in support of our space mission. I know that we both share the goal of achieving a strong bipartisan NASA authorization bill to provide the stability and resources NASA needs if it is to accomplish the inspiring missions we have asked it to carry out. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate Administrator Bolden appearing before us again today to present the President's budget request for NASA. While we may disagree on a few topics, I think we share the same desire to ensure that NASA remains the world's preeminent space agency so that our nation continues to lead the world in space exploration and discovery. And that is why I am concerned with the President's fiscal year 2015 budget request. Just 3 months ago, Congress and the President reached an agreement on NASA's budget. Now, just a few weeks later, the President recommends a $185 million cut to NASA. It also again seeks to fund an asteroid redirect or retrieval mission, despite what one article this week described as, quote, scant support in Congress and similarly muted interest in the science community, end quote. The Administration continues to push this mission on NASA without any connection to a larger exploration roadmap and absent support from the scientific community or NASA's own advisory bodies. It is a mission without a realistic budget, without a destination, and without a certain launch date. The committee has heard a number of concerns about the mission as well as many promising alternatives. For instance, the committee recently held a hearing on the potential for a flyby mission to Venus and Mars in 2021. While the mission is not without challenges, it is intriguing and would catch the public's imagination. Unfortunately, the budget underfunds the Space Launch System and Orion programs, as well as the Planetary Science Division.
$0.46 billion. For example, I have questions about the reduced funding requested for the Space Launch System and Orion crew vehicle, and the potential impact it will have on the program's abilities to achieve critical test flights in 2017 and 2021. I also want to understand the implications of the proposed shutdown of the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, SOFIA, good thing we call it SOFIA, a project that was undertaken in partnership with Germany. And I want to hear about whether there are options that should be explored and that were explored that might preserve our investment in this facility. I also want to learn more about the proposal to fund studies on potential wide-field infrared survey telescope W-FIRST mission and the science that such a mission might enable. I look forward to hearing from Administrator Bolden about increases being requested for the commercial crew program. We need to know what we will be getting for that money and how NASA will ensure that both astronaut safety and the interest of the taxpayer will be protected. In addition, I hope to learn today whether the base level request for the International Space Station, and particularly that for research on the ISS, will be sufficient to ensure that a robust research pipeline is in place to support the proposed extension of ISS operations and utilization through 2024. And I have questions about the proposed changes to NASA's education programs. We've raised those questions here in this committee before. Those programs to date have played a critical role in inspiring so many of our nation's youth to seek science and technical degrees and careers. Mr. Chairman, I also want to take this opportunity to clarify for the record that while I paid the NASA administrator a compliment for his passionate and lucid explanation of the asteroid redirect mission to a group of students recently. That's how I spend my time watching television. I continue to have questions about this potential mission and how it would contribute relative to other potential missions to enable the goal of sending humans to the surface of Mars. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'm hopeful that today's discussion will help inform our continuing